evening, I'm Natalie Shepard.
And I'm Tom Trump. The infamous oil spill cam from the 2010 BP disaster. People around the world were haunted by these images of oil spewing into the Gulf, unchecked for nearly 3 months.
But that was far from the last oil to spew into the Gulf. Now check out these images of a different spill. Eyewitness investigator David Hammer uncovered this exclusive video from 4 years after BP. He joins us now with part 1 of his special series, Oil and Water.
That's right, Natalie and Todd, and this time it was no accident. This comes to us from a whistleblower in Houston, an offshore worker who sacrificed his career to expose his supervisors who dumped oil and chemicals into the Gulf on purpose and then tried to cover it up.
Evan Howington had a dream job. It was like a high-stakes video game.
You make it move through the water.
Howington controlled remotely operated vehicles, robot submarines used by oil rigs to do important and sometimes dangerous work deep in the Gulf of Mexico.
You make it go forward, backwards, up, down, left, right, and you control the arms with a joystick.
But on his very first day on the Uncle John oil rig, Howington felt something wasn't right.
Really, that first shift is when it all started to go downhill.
His very first shift.
The very first shift.
Before the Uncle John even left Pensacola Harbor, Howington noticed hydraulic oil dripping off the docked submarine and into the water below. He took pictures. He laid down absorbent cloths. He told his supervisor, who apparently didn't care.
I remember his response very clearly. It was, "Oh, it's just Telus 32. Don't worry about it." So I was kind of shocked. I was like, what?
And that was just a prelude to an even bigger shock when the Uncle John got to its work site, a well operated by Walter Oil and Gas, 60 miles off Port Fourchon.
Now here's how Walter's oil well was supposed to work. Oil flowing out of the ground 1,500 feet below the surface of the Gulf of Mexico through a stack of pipes and valves called the Christmas tree stack. Then it connects to a pipeline through a connector called the jumper line. That wasn't flowing like it should at this well, though, so they added chemicals to try to ease the flow. That didn't work, so they eventually had to send out the Uncle John rig from Pensacola. When they closed off either end of the jumper line to remove it, they had to send down an ROV to remove the material inside using a bag called a bladder. But every time they did it, it just filled right back up again. So they gave up and just did this.
Howington's bosses from the contractor he worked for, Canyon Offshore, and the rig boss for Walter stood in the control room, joking about what they were doing.
That's nothing harmful there. No, that's inhibitor. That's inhibitor. Awesome.
The bosses watched the ROV camera lens turn black with chemicals and what looked like oil, and just let it keep on gushing for almost 90 minutes.
They could have shut it at any time, but they just decided to sit there and watch it for an hour and a half.
Because even before they opened it, you knew they were going to do that, and you knew that was wrong.
Yeah, so I recorded that, and then I guess I kind of got a little nervous, a little like deer in headlights when people walked in, so I cut it off, and then I realized nobody was paying attention to me. So I was like, I'll just turn it back on, record some more.
What he captured is nothing short of amazing.
And I recorded the client rep admitting to knowing that it was illegal.
It doesn't sound like a lot.
I recorded them laughing about it.
That was the clean front of the ROV. The whole top of the phones, hot, headache rack, flights.
And, I recorded them saying, if anyone asks, it's not oil. I recorded them talking about how they were going to log it in a particular way, so you couldn't really tell, to cover it up.
Matter of fact, all I did was just read pressure. Pressure.
He was talking about doing it under the cover of darkness.
Like, yeah, he's nervous and everything. That's what it was like about 3 o'clock last night.
The company man.
That's the company man. That's the highest you get on the boat.
We showed this video to Rally Hoke of Gulf Restoration Network, one of the leading environmental watchdogs for Gulf drilling.
I mean, I've never seen a video like that that just documents in such detail the decision-making process when it comes to basically allowing an illegal discharge.
He's never met Howington, but admires the risk he took to expose Walter.
I think what Evan did was incredibly brave. I mean, he put his livelihood and his future on the line to hold this company accountable.
But what about the people Howington caught in the act? Were they held accountable? A spokesman for Walter Oil and Gas said the rig boss in the video, David Thibodeau, was an independent contractor and wouldn't say if he's continued to work for Walter. And the contractors who employed the others in the video, Canyon Offshore and CalDive, did not respond to our questions.
We don't punish folks who are doing the wrong thing, and we're never going to change that culture.
Now, a year and a half after Howington reported the incident to federal authorities, Walter Oil and Gas was convicted of a felony and fined $400,000. In a statement, Walter said, quote, "While no Walter employees were directly involved in this incident, Walter has taken responsibility for it and implemented corrective actions to prevent similar incidents in the future."
Well, so David, how does Howington feel about the outcome of the federal investigation?
Well, he's not too happy about it, actually, and if you watch tomorrow night at 10, I'll have more on why he thinks the government actually let the oil companies off the hook.
All right, David, thank you so much. Our exclusive investigation exposed shocking video of a rig crew dumping oil and chemicals directly into the Gulf of Mexico for 90 minutes.
Wait until you hear what happened to the whistleblower who filmed the crime in progress. David Hammer joins us now with part 2 of his special investigation, Oil and Water.
Unfortunately, it's an all-too-typical story. A Houston man exposed the illegal dumping, and the government convicted the oil company, but the whistleblower was so shocked by how little federal prosecutors charged that he came to me to expose the rest of the story.
Evan Howington is most comfortable on the water, and he embraced the heady responsibility of working on the water too, controlling deep-sea divers' environment and operating unmanned submarines on oil rigs.
You're accountable for yourself and you're accountable for everyone else's safety as well.
But Howington has left offshore work behind for good and has gone back to school. He says he can't go back offshore, not after he blew the whistle on his supervisors in April 2014. That's when they opened this valve on a subsea pipe and let oil and chemicals gush into the Gulf for 90 minutes. And Howington recorded the whole thing on his cell phone.
At one point I was thinking in my head, what am I doing? This is crazy, but I have to do it. You know, if I don't record this, no one will ever know.
He caught the supervisors laughing and talking about how they would cover it up.
Matter of fact, all I did was just release breath. I just did that
Pressure.
my equipment is exactly what I want. Yeah, I know how to do it.
And these are the top people, right? These are the people in charge of the operation.
And when he got back to shore 3 weeks later, Howington brought his evidence to maritime attorney Tommy Servos.
To have better evidence, you'd have to be watching a movie.
Servos and Howington brought that evidence to New Orleans and met with EPA investigators and the U.S. Attorney's Office.
It's a bulletproof case.
But after the investigation began, a different assistant U.S. attorney named John Maestri took over, and Howington and Servos said they were cut out of the process.
I don't know the guy, personally. I've never even met the guy, which is part of the problem. We didn't meet.
A year and a half later, Maestri got a conviction. The oil company, Walter Oil and Gas, admitted to a felony, failure to report an illegal discharge of chemicals, and paid a $400,000 fine. But no individuals were charged. The contractors who employed most of the people involved weren't charged. There was no separate charge for intentional dumping. No charges for each of the 24 days Howington says he witnessed the supervisors letting hydraulic oil leak into the Gulf, all of which was caught on video.
It seems like it wasn't even looked at. I think they took the path of least resistance, got an easy win, and congratulated themselves, patted themselves on the back.
Servos says if the government had charged Walter with all of the crimes Howington alleged, convictions could have netted more than $28 million, with Howington eligible to collect $6 million. Howington sent a letter to the federal judge complaining that the U.S. attorney was letting Walter Oil and Gas off the hook. Maestri responded with his own letter to the judge, arguing that Howington, the person who brought the case to the government, didn't have any standing to comment about it.
It's a slap in the face, not just to me, but to anyone who wants to come forward.
Environmental watchdog Rowley Hoke agrees.
Evan's bravery didn't lead to actually this company being fully held accountable. Can we really expect other whistleblowers to come forward when they see something?
We've documented other cases like this in the past, including this one in 2013, when Randy Como of Lafayette exposed rig workers who were using coffee filters to doctor samples of the processed water they were dumping overboard. Como brought a lawsuit that the government joined to get a conviction, but Como got nothing, except fired. Former Democratic Congressman George Miller of California tried several times after the BP disaster to pass legislation to give offshore workers the same whistleblower protection as other industries.
Now, why shouldn't they have the same protection that railroad workers have, the transport workers have?
Each time, it was blocked by Republicans.
Why would you vote against protecting employees' rights in an already unsafe environment?
Howington has filed an administrative claim against Assistant U.S. Attorney Maestri to the Justice Department in Washington. He feels betrayed by the government, but doesn't regret his decision to sacrifice his career to expose polluters.
If you take me back there, I'll do it again. I'll report it again. It's wrong. It's illegal. It's against the law, and it puts everyone at risk, and it needs to be dealt with.
We received this statement from U.S. Attorney Kenneth Polite. Because Mr. Howington has a pending civil claim related to the closed Walter Oil criminal matter, I cannot comment in detail on all of his particular allegations. I can state confidently, however, that Walter Oil pled guilty to an environmental criminal charge appropriate to the facts and evidence. Further, our office timely responded to the questions and concerns of Mr. Howington's counsel. Ultimately, I expect Mr. Howington's claim to be denied. Tom, Natalie?
Some of the things that you've shown in your videos are inexcusable.
Eyewitness investigator David Hammer exposed what happens when offshore workers intentionally disregard the law and dump oil and chemicals into the Gulf of Mexico.
So how often does it happen, and what's the effect on the environment? Tonight, David is getting answers to those questions and uncovers new possible dangers in part 3 of our special series, Oil and Water.
The 2010 BP oil spill was deadly for the 11 men who were killed in the rig explosion and for wildlife of all kinds caught up in 200 million gallons of oil spewing full blast for nearly 3 months.
It takes very little contact of oil on a bird to kill it.
Even 5 years later, we saw dead dolphins, tar mats washing up on beaches, and scientists discovered a 10 million gallon bathtub ring the size of Rhode Island on the floor of the Gulf. And now, almost 7 years on, a former government biochemist is documenting for the first time the long-term effects on many unseen species.
And so when you kill a lot of animals at one level in the food web, the things that they ate all of a sudden aren't being consumed, so their population goes up. And then because their population goes up, they eat more of what's below them. So there's sort of an alternation in the food web.
Short says his findings of indirect impact down the food chain fly in the face of industry claims that oil spills don't really damage the larger Gulf environment.
You can always make an ecosystem level impact seem small by just comparing it to, say, planet Earth.
or the whole Gulf of Mexico.
Or the whole Gulf, yeah.
Environmental watchdogs like Jonathan Henderson say the damage is renewed every day in the Gulf from more oil spills.
It wasn't just the BP oil disaster that led to a heightened strain on our wetlands, but there's all these other little spills that are happening just way too much.
Henderson flies over offshore rigs and platforms 3 times a month and has reported more than 100 spills to the Coast Guard.
Now, you may be surprised to learn that there were actually 10,000 of those smaller spills in the 5 years after the BP spill. This map from SkyTruth shows where they occurred over time. This map shows the relative size of each of their sheens. To give you an idea, the BP spill sheen covered this area each day for 87 days and then moved to the shore.
Oil industry lobbyist Gifford Briggs says 10,000 spills may sound like a lot, but they only account for about 1 million gallons of spilled crude each year. That's tiny, especially compared with the 20 billion gallons of crude the industry produces over that same year period.
Many of the incidents that get reported are very small in nature, have very quick, immediate responses, and there is no immediate impact.
But are the oil companies telling the truth about how much is really spilled?
When the companies themselves are on an honor system to report how much oil was discharged, and nobody's going out to look at it and document that, they can get away with it.
Never was that more evident than with a Taylor Energy well that's been leaking off the tip of Plaquemines Parish for 12 years. At one point, the company reported a 10-mile slick, but these satellite photos show it was actually 30 miles long. An Associated Press investigation in 2015 found the leak had actually spilled a total of 20 times more oil than what the New Orleans-based company had reported. Then, there are companies that don't report their spills at all. In part 1 of our series Oil and Water, we showed you shocking video shot by rig worker Evan Howington of his supervisors opening a valve and letting illegal discharge flow into the Gulf for 90 minutes. They joked about it and covered it up. Briggs insists that's not typical behavior for most oil and gas workers.
Some of the things that you've shown in your videos are inexcusable, but they don't represent the largest industry in the state of Louisiana. They don't represent the majority of the hardworking men and women that go to work every day producing the energy that fuels this great country.
And then there's the rise of offshore fracking, a process that uses chemicals to ease the flow of oil through layers of sandy bedrock. After they frack, oil companies can dispose of those chemicals in the processed water they dump overboard. The Center for Biological Diversity had to sue the federal government to expose just how prevalent fracking has become, more than 1,200 times from 2010 to 2014 alone.
The scale of it is already alarming from what we know from our FOIA response, but it's only likely to increase.
The overwhelming majority of what comes back is just water. Right. And so, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be tested, it doesn't need to be disposed of properly.
But there's the problem. The EPA says it's still studying the situation and has not yet put any limits on how much of the fracking chemicals can be dumped in the Gulf.
You can't see those fracking chemicals. When I fly out over the Gulf, I can spot an oil sheen. What really is frightening is that there's all this other stuff extremely harmful to the Gulf ecosystem.
David Hammer, Eyewitness News.
The number of reported spills in the Gulf has been dropping steadily since a high of 245 per month in 2012, down to 80 in October of this year.